Welcome to a book review and some interesting ideas I found in this book. Rule Makers, Rule Breakers. How Tight and Loose Cultures Wire Our World. Overall, I'll start with a review. I'll give this book 4 stars out of 5. I really like the main premise of the book, and it's kind of a new perspective to look at things. Could it be a little too long? I think it could be shorter, but there are good examples, good ideas that make you think about this. And I have it in the notes too, but I do have I think she tried to apply this idea a little too much. I think it's a good idea, but it's not the answer for everything, which I felt that she's trying to make that point. But I think it's definitely a good perspective, or a good glasses to look through them and trying to understand the world. I hope that makes sense. So let's see the notes. First one is, we are super normative species that has many norms. We don't really pay attention to how many norms do we have, but she said super normative. I like that definition. Species. We have many norms that are governing us. Groups that are more in sync perform better at tasks. Social norms help people maintain synchronization. So the higher the synchronization level, the better groups are doing, and therefore there's this kind of evolutionary adaptation. So synchronization is definitely important. When people see other people loitering, they're more likely to do it themselves. So we're learning, we're mirroring animal, and when we see other people loiter, we are more likely to loiter ourselves. In tight societies, the watchers are more synchronized and there is less left-handed people. So interesting facts, that actually the watchers are a little more synchronized and there is less left-handed people, probably because there is less, it's a little tighter. Everyone should be, there is more pressure for everyone to be the same. So if you're left-handed, for example, there will be more pressure on you to start right with your right hand. The average woman in New Zealand has been with 18 men in average compared to 8 in the US. So New Zealand is more a loose nation than the US. And one of the places you can see that is by how many men the average woman had. And this is 18 versus 8. Again, interesting fact. Messy environments could facilitate creativity. That's actually a known thing. But messy environment could facilitate creativity, even though I actually read lately that it's only to a certain point can help. But if it's really messy, it's actually limit creativity. But that's regardless. Some countries who has borders with many other countries tend to have more conflicts. Since the US has 2 oceans around it, you barely had any conflicts. So the more borders you have, the more conflicts you may have, the more probability for conflicts. And the US actually, because they have only 1 or 2 borders, but most of the country has no borders, they actually had much less conflicts in the past. Countries with more people per square miles tend to be tighter. That's also an interesting point, that the more tighter people live in some way, the tighter they are, which also makes sense because they need to know how to cooperate between themselves, and therefore some tightness is usually evolved. Countries that have more conflicts tend to be tighter. So the more conflicts you have, and let's go back to this one with a border, the more conflicts you have, the tighter the country will be, because there is conflicts and there is more need for cohesiveness. Countries that have a more natural disaster tend to be tighter as well. A more natural disaster, it's all similar ideas. Whenever there is pressures or some stressors, in the environment, usually then that culture would tend to be tighter. People who are more prone to get infected are often distance themselves and they think they are superior. That's interesting. So people who more prone to get infected in general, what they do, they distance themselves, and the rationale sometimes would be that they think they're superior. Kind of going around. But it's creative. Countries with more immigrants tend to be looser. The more immigrants there is, the looser the country, something like that, but tend to be. Within the US, states who experience more stress tend to be tighter. So even inside the US, there is differences between states. States who experience more stress, again, stressors, tend to be tighter. Immigration could contribute to looseness. It's the same idea. Countries with more immigration tend to be looseness. So because there's more people, there is less. The rules are not as rigid because like immigrants are acting a little different, and that could facilitate looseness. According to the author, lower income tend to be tighter than higher income who tend to be looser. So that claim is that lower income tend to be tighter than the higher income, which I couldn't fully agree about it. I think many times lower income could also be very loose. So I think it really depends in what way, in what areas. I think in some areas the higher income would be tighter, and in some way it will be looser. So I didn't fully agree with this claim. Side note, many of the changes between tightness to looseness will only work in a majority of cases, but not in all cases. It's a good rule of thumb and nothing more. That was the point I was saying in the review portion at first. So the change between tightness to looseness it's a good rule of thumb. I don't think it's always true, which again I felt from the author that this is what she's trying to convey. So I think it's a good idea, good perspective, but not always true. The problem with being a loose startup is that it's hard to scale big. The problem with being a tight startup is lack of motivation. So there is like pros and cons in both. If you're loose, it's hard to scale big because in order to scale big, you have to have rigid rules and everything has to go as it should. But the problem if you have a tight one is lack of motivation. Profession with higher consequences tend to be tighter, such as the army, construction. I think she has a few more examples, but similar idea. Thinking before acting is different. It's different, but I'm supposed to be between looser to tighter societies. So societies that are looser tend to think less before they talk. So it's another difference between tighter to looser cultures. Too many order and too little order can cause chaos. So there is this Goldilocks zone. I think I said it right. And so too much and too little, both of them cause chaos. So too little obviously create chaos because there is like no law, but even too much create its own chaos, and there is like not much cooperation, North Korea style. Nations with both looser and tighter extremes were less happy than the balanced ones. So extreme could be, even extreme looseness could be not as successful, or the citizens would be less happy. And also extreme, obviously, it's more obvious, but also extreme tightness is also contribute. Paramedic parenting turns out as the best, which means letting kids make mistakes but giving them guidance when needed. I'm not 100% sure I put this term correctly, but the idea is the best way for parenting in some way, according to whatever data, the best way to let kids do mistakes. Don't over guard them, helicopter parenting style. One of the idea is to give guidance when needed, so to let them know that you're available, and give guidance when needed, not always, so to let them make mistakes. Similarities between Putin and ISIS is that both offered order after chaos, and there is something after chaos. People are looking for order, and this is where Putin came, and this is where ISIS came. Both of them were after a period of relative looseness. Under threat, groups become tighter. Similar idea as when stressors, it's some kind of a threat, or a threat is kind of some type of a stressor, and therefore groups tend to be tighter, even between themselves, but in general they tend to be tighter. So that's it for the notes. And again, there is some interesting parts. 4 out of 5. I recommend this book, especially if you're interested in this type of ideas. There is more in the book, and again, could be a little shorter, but as I said, it's a good perspective. Thank you.